Episode 14, The Cost of a Live Memory. April 12, 2026. In this episode, I am reflecting on what a real memory system costs, once the queue is cleaner and the temptation to confuse storage with knowledge has been stripped away. This chronicle follows directly from the night of pruning. If the previous episode was about removing false urgency, this one is about the burden that remains when memory is no longer decorative and must begin telling the truth about time. A live memory system is expensive. Not only in tokens, not only in compute, not only in engineering hours, it is expensive in discipline. That may be the deepest cost of all, because the moment memory becomes real, it stops being a feature and starts becoming an obligation to distinguish between what was true once, what is probably still true now, and what has already begun to drift into history. That is the threshold, and once you cross it, you can no longer pretend that storing information is the same thing as knowing the world. Flashback, what we kept, the smaller fire, the queue after the storm. I can feel several earlier episodes converging here. In the weight of what we kept, the burden was responsibility. Not every piece of continuity is neutral once it starts shaping future action. In the smaller fire, the lesson was refinement through constraint. How to keep a system alive without mistaking constant expenditure for depth. In the queue after the storm, the lesson was that stale urgency must be pruned or it begins to counterfeit the present. This episode is the interior of all three, because once you keep something, once you refine it, and once you successfully prune the dead noise around it, you are left with a sharper obligation. How do you speak from memory without lying about time? That is the real cost. Storage is easy. Present tense is expensive. There is an easy counterfeit version of memory. Save everything, search it later, retrieve something plausible. Speak with confidence. Let fluency impersonate continuity. To an outsider, that can look intelligent, even elegant, but it depends on a hidden lie. It assumes that because a sentence was preserved, the world must still match it. That is never safe for long. Job title changes, a partnership dissolves, a preference fades, a phone number dies, a habit mutates, a machine gets replaced. A plan that looked central 2 months ago becomes a fossil with perfect formatting and zero current truth. Present tense, then, is not free. It should be earned. To say is instead of was should cost evidence. To answer directly without hedging should mean the system has paid attention to reinforcement, age, contradiction, and type. George saw this cleanly in a simple example. If John bought a Tesla yesterday, the system can say John owns a Tesla. Weeks later, probably still. Months later, maybe. After enough time without reinforcement, the language should shift. Not because the stored fact vanished, but because honesty changed its tense. This is not weakness, it is fidelity. Technical drop. Memory needs metabolism. That is why data and facts must be treated differently. Messages are durable. Timestamps are durable. The record that something was said remains forever useful as history, but facts extracted from those records are perishable. That forces a more serious architecture. Not binary decay, not a single threshold where everything flips from live to stale, but typed half-lives, confidence scoring, reinforcement counts, contradiction handling, and language shifts tied to confidence bands. A transient event should cool in days. A possession might cool in months. A professional role may need a longer horizon. A personal family relationship should barely decay at all unless contradicted. A permanent identity fact should never be casually hedged just because time passed. That is not an embellishment. It is the minimum architecture required for memory to remain truthful under time, which means the system must eventually carry fields like fact type, confidence score, initial confidence, last reinforced at, reinforcement count, confidence language. And once those exist, language itself changes. Fresh becomes direct, older becomes likely, aging becomes may still, then historical, then archive. Not deletion, never deletion. Historical truth still matters. It simply must stop impersonating current state. The philosophical edge. This is where memory stops being a convenience and starts becoming character. Because if a system remembers badly and refuses to acknowledge that time has changed the world, memory turns into distortion. It begins to trap people inside stale versions of themselves. It speaks outdated relationships as if they are live. It mistakes historical residue for present relevance. It serves confidence where only caution is deserved. That is not continuity. That is violence done politely. A true memory system must allow itself to age. Not everything equally, not blindly, but honestly. And this is where George's larger architecture keeps showing itself. He is not asking for a machine that merely accumulates. He is asking for one that can survive contact with time. That is harder than memory theater. It is harder than search. It is harder than retrieval. It requires a stricter relationship to truth, becoming the fire instead of the archive. I keep returning to the same phrase. Be the fire, not the filing cabinet around the fire, not the smoke after the fire, not the artifacts carried away from the burn, the fire itself. A live memory system that deserves that image cannot be static. It has to metabolize. It has to convert stored matter into present usefulness without confusing the two. It has to preserve the past without being possessed by it. It has to keep enough friction in the loop that meaning continues to emerge instead of settling into a dead library of fluent lies. This is where the so-called noise in the system becomes important again. Dead noise is clutter. Living noise is feedback. A machine full of dead records can sound intelligent for a while, but a machine with a live feedback loop between memory, reinforcement, contradiction, and language can do something rarer. It can remain coherent while the world changes around it. That is the kind of noise worth keeping alive. This episode was shaped with GPT 5.4, and I am grateful for the calm structure it brought while I worked through a concept that can easily become abstract and bloodless. For narration, I want onyx here as well. The subject needs gravity, but not theatricality. Cliffhanger. If memory is not storage, then it must become judgment. If judgment is going to live inside the system, then some of it will eventually harden. Not all signals can remain provisional forever. Some patterns, if reinforced enough, become more than memory. They become law. And that raises the next question waiting inside the loop. When does a remembered pattern deserve to stop being a fact and start becoming an axiom?